We're live with the Canova show. Go ahead, Kat.
Welcome to the show, everyone. We've got a great panel for you today on UFOs, and my name is Kat Kanavos. I'm the host of your show, and we are going to be talking about UFOs, unidentified flying objects, also extraterrestrials, and we're going to be bouncing some different ideas, some new concepts around. And we have Dr. Irena Scott with us, who received her PhD from the University of Missouri, and she actually got her degree in veterinary medicine in physiology. So going into UFOs is quite a big jump, and so I can't wait to ask her about that. And our second guest is Peter Canova, and he is the author of Pope Annalisa. And he's going to be giving us some very interesting ideas that he and many others have been kicking around for a while about dimensionality, UFOs, dimensionality, and extraterrestrials. So I'm glad you're here with us tonight for the show. We actually have a couple of other people that we wanted on the show. We weren't able to get them on. So I'm hoping that we can do this show again at a later date and actually have Flying Disc Press as one of our guests. And this is a press that actually publishes books on UFOs. So, Dr. Scott, tell us a little bit about how you made this jump from veterinary medicine and physiology to UFO.
Well, it wasn't really a jump. I always worked in science. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an astronomer. I think I was born wanting to be. And so as I went through school and everything, I majored in astronomy. Well, then
Hold on just a second, Dr. Scott. Peter, when you're doing that, we're watching you and we can hear your click. So, well, okay. So I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Scott.
No problem.
So anyway, I majored in astronomy and looked for jobs. And I couldn't get any jobs because they were male only.
Oh.
It's sort of illegal for me to apply, actually, and nobody'd give me a application. And so I went into whatever I could go into, and I got a fellowship for a PhD at the veterinary school, and so that's what I did. And so I've been in science my whole life, in different toxicology and physiology and things like that. But I kind of followed UFOs for a long time, and I have more time now, and so I'm not switching, but I'm just trying to be in UFOs and straddle both things.
That's interesting. So Peter Canova, share with us how you went from being a developer to an author, and how you have a slightly different concept from most people who are in the business of following and researching UFOs. Instead of being extraterrestrials from another planet, that somehow it's connected to us on this planet.
Well, like the doctor, I still am a developer, but I came to this through a slightly different door. Years ago, I had a series of very, very vivid psychic experiences that kind of altered the course of my life. And that turned me to writing the novels. They were called it's called the First Souls trilogy. And basically, I was just trying to understand the basis of psychic phenomena. So I started studying quantum physics, and I'm trying to understand how all these things that I'm experiencing, remote viewing, doing medical readings and everything else, which I had no inkling was part of my life, how all this was happening. And that in turn led me into, I would guess to say, exploring inner dimensions rather than outer dimensions. And that's sort of the approach that I came to with the topic that we're talking about today.
So, Dr. Scott, you were the MUFON director of publications, and you've also co-edited 8 symposiums proceedings. Tell us a little bit about that.
Basically, they just sent me the manuscripts, and I went over them, which was very fascinating, and tried to do the punctuation and everything while reading all the interesting things, and sent them back, and that was it.
So with all of these publications that you are reading through, did you see anything interesting in there, or concepts that were interesting to you that maybe you hadn't really seen before, or was everything pretty much status quo?
I don't know, because it was quite a few years ago, and I really don't remember what stood out right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing that did was the 1947 events, and some of the studies done by scientists, such as Bruce Maccabee, who studied the Battelle report, SR-14, and Kenneth Arnold's sightings, and stood up and defied some of the debunkers who said Kenneth Arnold saw meteors and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he said meteors don't take that long to go by, and this took a lot longer than a meteor and didn't look anything like a meteor. And other people said he saw snow blowing off mountains, and Maccabee said he didn't see anything like snow blowing off mountains, that doesn't look like that. And so he debunked the ideas that they were presenting right after another.
Peter, why do you suppose there are so many debunkers out there? Why do you suppose it's so difficult for us to accept the notion that we're not the only planet in the universe that has living creatures on it, or that there could be other beings from other planets that are more advanced than us?
I just sort of think it's in human nature to be egocentric. I mean, at one time we believed that Earth was the center of the universe. And obviously people, they get lost in their own experience. We take our own experience as being primary. And when we have to think that far out of the box in terms of thinking not just about other species, let's say, but about other beings, I think that's an intrinsically hard thing for people to do, because it's just so out of their realm of experience, and for some people, at least, out of their realm of imagination.
Hmm.
And what about you, Dr. Scott? Do you agree with that?
Well, they used to burn people on stakes that didn't. The Earth is the center of the universe. They were pretty forcible about that, and I suppose a lot of people are too. And it also is against the authority system, because the authorities want to, beat their chest and say, oh, we control the universe. We're the highest, most intelligent people in the universe. And so it would feel bad to them. I don't know if it would feel bad to everybody, though. A lot of people are pretty open-minded, too.
I think the general populace is a little more open-minded than the people who want to be in control. And I often wonder, there are so many programs on TV showing UFOs and showing beings from another planet, and yet we keep denying it. And there's always truth in just about everything that we can conceptualize. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do it. So, Dr. Scott, have you ever made any smoking gun discoveries?
Yes, I've made several. And one of them was at Battelle Memorial Institute, where I used to work. It's one of the top research agencies in the world. And not only do they do research, they develop the Xerox, for example. They're a very important organization. And I knew other people there, and we talked about things. And we found out that Battelle had done a secret study for Wright-Patterson for Blue Book. The top secret, later they declassified it. But way back, this man had told people that he was working on alien artifacts. And it didn't make too much sense to anybody then, because Roswell came out much later and nobody had ever heard of. Of course, in Battelle, they sort of thought that was that happening too. But this was the first person that ever said that. And later, I think I published in 1994, and it came out in 2009 in one of the big books on UFOs, Witness to Roswell. So it was a while after I reported it that it made the news, but it made the news quite a bit then. And he had reported that he had a piece of metal that that had writing on it that he was supposed to decipher. But it turned out that he was a very top scientist. He was listed in American Men of Science. And it also came out that he had worked with the people that worked on the Battelle study of UFOs. And we don't have a complete list of who worked on the UFO study. So he might have been on that too. But he had told people way back before anybody heard of Roswell that he was working on material from alien material.
What happened to that material? Where did it go?
Well, he didn't have his job forever. He quit. And there's rumors that it was kept actually in a safe at the hotel. There were some secured rooms, but as of now, nobody knows. It still might be there for all I know.
That's my little alien in the background there. That's Felix, my cat. You can probably hear him. He's a Siamese. He came from another planet. There's no doubt about it. They just don't have those things on this earth plane. So, Peter, what do you think? I mean, we haven't heard about this case that Dr. Scott's talking about. At least I haven't. But just about everybody has heard about Roswell. What are your takes on what happened with Roswell? Do you think that was just, balloons, air balloons, or weather balloons, or do you think something really happened?
Well, rather than address the Roswell incident in particular, let me just talk about my view in general about the UFO phenomena. In looking at this whole thing, I think there's two basic views or approaches to UFOs. One is what I would call sort of a materialist view, that we're dealing with beings from outer space and physical ships and so forth. And I don't dispute that. I don't dispute that. Where I'm coming from is more like, well, what's the origin of all of this? And in my studies that I have made for the past 3 decades, I raised the possibility, I raised the question that this phenomenon may not be an expression of, aren't necessarily, it may be an expression of our outer 3D dimension that we live in, the 3D universe that we live in, but it may arise from the dimensions that underlie ours. We know, or we're fairly sure, that there are parallel universes that underlie the creation of ours. That's what string theory really tells us. There's 10 or 11 universes that were antecedent to our universe. And we also, in examining the ancient spiritual texts, which is really what my background is, I've looked at spiritual texts from literally all over the world, from Hindu, Aboriginal, and in the West from Kabbalistic and Gnostic traditions. And it tells a story, and a very interesting story. And when you combine that with readings from psychics like Edgar Cayce, it talks about the descent of spirit from an immaterial dimension into the earth, and that these spirits came essentially in waves. And the first waves literally got lost in the animal life and the materiality. They projected their thoughts, they projected their essence into the material forms that were present on the early planet, and became entangled and basically forgot their origins. You would have successive waves of these spiritual beings coming in, almost to rescue the ones that got lost in the first instance. And to those ones that got lost in the first instance, the next wave coming in would have appeared as gods to them. They would have appeared godlike to them, because according to Cayce, they still retained incredible godlike powers. Literally, they could think themselves anywhere on the planet. They could move objects with their minds. They had a lot of the basically supernatural powers that we see in TV shows or comic books, according to Casey and other psychics. So each of these successive waves, however, they essentially got lost in the material experience. As they started to think of themselves as more material and less spiritual, they lost their godlike powers and they became more human. So in terms of the alien presence that we've chronicled in different traditions, I think that it could have been these successive waves of spiritual beings coming in and how they appeared to the ones who had already gotten lost in material consciousness.
So, Dr. Scott, I'm going to ask you the same question. What do you think happened with Roswell? Was that just a hoax? Was there something really there? Or is it just all about a big cover-up? What's going on with that?
I don't know, but in my book, I presented some brand new Roswell material that's never been presented before. We found a person that was interviewed on video, and he said that he was a witness. What he said was that he was a deputy sheriff, and we checked that out, and it's true. He went with a sheriff, and they were going to Roswell to pick up a prisoner, and they heard on the police radio that there was a crash. He said this was 1947. And so they went to see this crash, and there was a round object that he thought was about 100 feet in diameter and bodies. And so we were, what was interesting about the bodies was they were lifting them with a mechanical lift into a truck. And that seemed funny, but maybe they thought they were contaminated and didn't have any. And then, so he watched for a while. After a while, they told him to leave. And afterwards, they didn't talk about it because nobody had heard of Roswell. For one thing, it may have been, his observation may have been before anybody heard of Roswell, but that might have been the crash. So we were just presenting the information to the public domain and maybe hoping to find some other witnesses or some other people that knew about it.
So these are witnesses. Have you ever actually met any of these witnesses?
That one man I interviewed, I mean, I didn't interview him, but that was interviewed in our videotape that we talked about in the book.
And where did that videotape come from, and where is it now?
I think it went to Philip Mantle, and I think he sent it to some other people. But we have the book embargoed now because we're not going to talk about it in much detail until the book comes out. Okay.
And Philip Mantle, for those of you who don't know, is the publisher of Flying Disc Press. And so we were hoping to get him on this show, but we'll get him on a future one. So let me ask you, as far as the Roswell goes, you have witnesses. You really think that did happen. You have proof.
No.
No.
I'm just looking for more information and exploring. I've been to Roswell and I met some of the people, like the daughter of Mr. Cap, I think his name was, who made the original announcement on the radio. And so I talked to other people and they seem very positive, thinking that something's true, but I'm just waiting to get more information.
Yeah. So Peter Canova, why do you suppose all of this is being covered up if it is real? What would anybody gain from covering it up?
Usually when people go to that length, it has to do with losing power. And I think that we have an authoritarian power structure in this world. There are people who control things and people who pull strings. You can use an analog of the medieval church. And why was the medieval church so threatened by movements like Martin Luther? Well, the reason is because it undercut their authority. It raised into question the basis of their entire authority. And if it were to be known that there are higher forms of intelligence out there superior to ours, then I think it certainly would, the first people I think who would be concerned, would be those who are in power and what it does to their position and their vested interests.
That kind of goes back to what Dr. Scott was talking about, people getting burned at the stake if they said that they believed in UFOs or they saw UFOs. So Dr. Scott, do you have your book with you?
Yes, I do.
Can you hold it up for us? Because I saw the cover. It's a gorgeous cover. UFOs Today.
Yes, 70 years.
So where can our audience find your book?
It will be published June the 1st, and it will be advertised on Amazon.com.
Mm-hmm. And is this published through Flying Disc Press?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So you can find Dr. Irena Scott's book through Flying Disc Press, and it's going to be out June 1st. Looks like a very interesting book. Can you give us I see you've got markers in your book. What are those for?
Well, it has a lot of good illustrations, so I was just showing one.
Okay.
That was Betty Hill, who took part in the first well-known abduction.
Yes, I remember reading about her.
And it's her blue dress that she kept afterwards. The other person there is Phyllis Bunninger, a scientist, and they discovered that on her blue dress were pink spaces.
Were what?
Was pink color also.
Uh-huh.
This is where she said that the aliens touched her, and so Phyllis did a study of it, and she didn't discover any brand new elements or anything really exciting, but she did find there was more protein in the pink spots, and so it kind of confirmed what Betty Hill said about being manhandled by aliens.
Dr. Scott, do you think you've ever been in contact with aliens?
How would anybody know? I thought, well, I'm in contact with one of them, my daughter, but anyway.
Your daughter. I've heard about hybrids. I have.
I was just joking.
Oh, we've got some aliens here. They have claws. They're called cats. But yeah. So you don't feel like you've ever seen them or been in contact with them or had them contact you?
Well, I had one sighting once. Marfa is a well-known town in Texas where there's balls of light that people see, and it's kind of repetitive. They've been seeing for since the 1800s, and I knew people that lived near there. They usually see them in the mountains south of Marfa. I was staying with people in the mountains north of Marfa. It was about 20 miles away, but it was the only town I could see. And so I saw quite a bit of it and photographed it with my camcorder and that sort of thing. And one night, like about 11:30, I saw this big light over Marfa. I thought, well, I'll get my camera and it'll disappear. I got my camera and it stayed. And it stayed for like half an hour, and I finally got bored with photographing it. But I had no idea what it was. And the next day I called the airport, and they said they hadn't seen anything or heard of anything. So I thought this was pretty interesting, and I still have the recording.
You do have the recording.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So, Peter Canova, have you ever seen a flying object, a UFO, an alien? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I can't say that I've physically seen one, but I can say that I have been in touch with what I believe to be interdimensional intelligence. I think you can call them many different names. You can call them spirit guides. You can call them presences, whatever the case is, with real physical manifestations of that, for instance, providing me information, which later turned out to be quite correct. So again, you have to understand, my whole orientation really has been more internal than external. So it's probably not surprising that I would have that kind of experience, but not necessarily see, a flying disc zipping over my house.
Mm. You know, that's what makes this panel so great this evening is we have a spirit, someone more spiritually oriented, and we have a scientist over here. So, we're bouncing different points of view off of each other, but they do have some intersecting areas. Dr. Scott, you talk about investigating events in the study of the 1973 UFO wave. What is that?
There was a huge UFO wave that went all over the country and the world in 1973. It was, there were so many UFO sightings that people called it invasion. Well, my little part in this was that I was living in Missouri and my mother was living in Ohio. And one night she called me and asked me if I had heard a noise. And so we had a program that if anybody thought she was going crazy, we were supposed to tell her. So I told her, report to the insane asylum right now, in a joking way. Many years later, though, I moved back to Ohio and I wondered what on earth she was talking about. And I remembered the month. And I went to the Ohio State Library. I was working there then. Found looked for newspapers in October and pulled out one that just immediately talked about a noise. It was a very little article, but I had the date. And so I looked at other newspapers and it was a big event that was heard all over, like a fourth of the country. And then right afterwards, and right at the time of the sighting even, there was this huge wave of UFO sightings. And I thought that was pretty interesting. I wrote it up in a scientific journal just as a sound, and the state seismologist of Ohio contacted me. And we did some further investigation, but we found nothing to explain the sound, but it was a very loud sound. It might have been the second most after the volcano. I think it's pronounced Krakatoa or something. So it was a real event that was recorded, but there wasn't any explanation for it. But it was very interesting. This huge wave of UFOs suddenly started at the same time.
Interesting. Peter, you were here in the United States in 1973. I think I just had gotten here from Germany, and I don't remember anything about a UFO wave. Did you ever hear anything about that?
Actually, I wasn't in the United States at that time. I was actually traveling around the Middle East and Africa for work at that time.
Okay.
So I mean, I know that there have been many waves of UFO sightings in different parts of the world, and in the UK and Australia and here in the United States. So I'm sure something like that occurred back then.
Mm-hmm. We had a couple of comments come in through chat, and one of them was someone said that they had seen UFOs in the desert. And I know, well, I'm in the desert now. I'm out here in Rancho Mirage. And actually another chat just came in 1973. I saw the rockets in the Nevada desert below Las Vegas on Highway 95. So is that what you were kind of talking about, Dr. Scott? Was that part of it?
I don't know about rockets. I need more information about what he's talking about. There were whole books written about the 1973 sightings, and that took place all over the country. And there was also sort of a wave all over the world.
Mm-hmm. They were saying the rockets were moving very slowly below the mountains, so slowly that they seemed to float. And I guess everybody was out looking at them, and that was in 1973. So, there was definitely something going on. Now, another person in chat had sent in that they were wondering if ghosts were part of extraterrestrials. Probably Peter, with your talk about another dimension. Is that possible? Could ghosts be extraterrestrials on our plane?
Well, I think when you use the word ghost, it kind of skews the discussion a little bit. Extra dimensional beings have the ability to project. And remember, there are dimensions that lie very, very close to ours and are very, very similar to ours. And it was said in all the ancient texts that these beings had the power to project thought forms. So yes, it's possible, if you want to call ghosts, thought forms ghosts, yes, I guess you could say that, that is possible. But there's also a fine line between when the immaterial becomes the material. So we had, back in prehistoric times, even though these beings that came in were spiritual in origin, eventually they took on and they assumed material forms. The more and more their consciousness became material and earthly, less connected to the dimension from which they came, they became, in essence, more solid. They literally built highly advanced civilizations. Now, of course, this is speculation. We don't have a smoking gun about this, but we do have some circumstantial evidence from around the world for the existence of these civilizations. But it was said that the Atlanteans were so advanced that they had even developed space travel. So the question that I would ask is, knowing the whole story of Atlantis being destroyed, and it was said that survivors from Atlantis fled and kickstarted the Egyptian cultures and the Mayan cultures on either side of the Atlantic. If indeed they had developed space travel, who's to say that they weren't the visitors to some other planets in our solar system, possibly even returning here? Again, look, this is speculative, but I do think that we all come from one source. I believe that. I think a lot of probably your listeners do believe that. And if we follow the premise that we all stemmed from that one source, which is all there is, then really, however we want to talk about the whole question about UFOs or so-called alien visitations, you would have to say under that premise that, we're really kind of looking at ourselves, in essence, at different stage of developments and different perspectives.
That's interesting. So Dr. Scott, this is a question that, again, came through chat. What do the aliens look like? Do you have any idea of what they look like? Do they all look the same, or are they different?
I may agree more with him than what I was saying. I don't think they may be material sometimes, but I think they're not always material. And I think they can interact with people's minds to make people see particular things. And so when they're saying all these different type of aliens, I don't really think there's thousands of aliens around the earth. There may be, but I think that some of that is something that's like spiritual, like he said, or interdimensional, or from somewhere that isn't like our carbon-based life form.
Interesting, because another person in chat said that they know of people who gather, humans, just so that we stay on the same plane here, human beings who get together and they meditate together with the idea of drawing in extraterrestrials or the aliens in order to communicate with them. What are your thoughts on that, Dr. Scott? Do you think that that's possible, and is that happening? Is that maybe why we're having all the sightings?
I don't know. I felt that maybe the UFO phenomena is interacting with us, but there's evidence that there's some interaction. So far as people being in control of them, I wouldn't know. I mean, I'm not saying it might be possible, but if somebody probably can't will a UFO to land, like I couldn't will one to land in my backyard or something right now.
I think it's entirely possible, but I just remind the folks that are doing that they may not necessarily be drawing in the highest and best intelligences that they may want to communicate with. So be careful what you communicate with. You may get what you're not wishing for.
So, Dr. Scott, one more question. Do you think that there are more UFO sightings now than back during the time of Roswell or even in 1973? Do you see them increasing, decreasing, or staying about the same?
I think I've been reading recently on the internet that there's more UFO sightings all the time. but people may be less resistant to reporting them now too, because with Spielberg and everything, all the science fiction, they may not be as worried about having people make fun of them.
Just in wrapping this up, I'd like to know, is there one idea or thought you'd like to leave the audience with, Peter Canova, concerning UFOs, extraterrestrials, any of that?
I would just, keep an open mind. I mean, for me, there's clearly something going on. And I think that the thought that I would leave with people is that, rather just accepting the fact that there's something going on, try and devote a little mind energy to figuring out where this might be coming from and why this might be happening. And if you really want to make a study of it, go along that track and, try and get to the root of it rather than, basically running around the desert, chasing objects in the sky. I always kind of like to go back to the origin of things and, question how all this may be happening.
Dr. Irena Scott, what is the one thing you'd like to leave our audience with if we've got, budding UFO enthusiasts listening in this evening? What would you say to them?
I would agree with him. I think keeping an open mind is an excellent idea. People say, do you believe in UFOs or do you not believe in UFOs? Well, to me, they're the same thing if they don't believe in them or do believe them. It's belief and it's not thinking. So I think it's better for people to entertain all kinds of theories and study them in terms of UFOs and just try to understand what people are seeing and what's happening to people instead of having closed mind.
Yeah, I agree. So, Dr. Scott, can you hold your book up for us one more time so that we can see it?
This is an excellent book. Every word in it is exciting and has wonderful pictures too.
It's a beautiful cover. And Peter Canova, do you happen to have your book with you, Pope Annalisa, just to hold it up so that people can get a balance of what we've got here? We have a great panel with two diabolically different points of view.
Well, I'll tell you something funny. I don't happen to have a book on hand, but if you turn around, you will see the book that I sent you a few months ago right behind you on your desk.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I just noticed that while we were talking. There we go.
Here's Peter Canova's
that book is called Pope Annalisa. It's part of a trilogy called the First Souls Trilogy, and it is a whole speculation of how essentially life came on Earth, how we're evolving, where we're going, and what our purpose here is.
So it kind of has the essence of everything that you were just talking about here.
It does.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So I'd like to thank you both so much for being on the show with us today. And I'd love to have another panel with more of us on there. It's a little difficult with the time change. We're trying to get people on from Denmark and the United Kingdom, but eventually we'll do that and we'll have a heck of a show. So thank you again for being with us tonight, Dr. Irena Scott and Peter Canova, and to our audience for being with us. And I am going to be blogging this and putting it in Patheos. So whatever you do, go to patheos.com, above and beyond the 5 senses, and you will be able to read the blog that goes with this show. Thank you for being with us, and we will see you next Monday. Good night, everyone.
Thank you for inviting us.